Welcome to Tech Unscripted, a series where we bring together leaders from across industries to explore how technology is transforming the way we work, learn, and innovate. In Season 3, we're focusing on the intersection of technology and leadership. Today's discussion is about something reshaping higher education right now, how universities are becoming AI-ready institutions. From research labs to classrooms to campus operations, artificial intelligence is redefining how universities prepare students and drive innovation. Joining me today are two incredible leaders who have spent their careers at the intersection of technology, research, and education. First, Dr. José-Marie Griffiths, president of Dakota State University, an institution nationally recognized for cybersecurity and technology education, and one that is actively building AI-optimized infrastructure for research and innovation. And second, Dr. Kristina Johnson, partner at Catalyzer Ventures, former president of Ohio State University, and former chancellor of SUNY. Dr. Johnson is an engineer, entrepreneur, and member of the National Academy of Engineering, with more than 45 patents and decades of leadership shaping research universities. Thank you both for being here.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right, before we jump into the big ideas, let's start with kind of a quick rapid fire round. Rules here, short answer, and just kind of first thing that comes to mind to start kind of getting the energy flowing here this morning. All right, first, Kristina, one word that describes the impact AI will have on higher ed.
Accelerator.
Accelerator, agreed. It's a great one.
Transformational.
Nice. All right, a technology trend on campus that people might be underestimating right now.
AI as a thought partner.
That's an interesting one. Looking forward to diving into that one.
I say data center modernization and consolidation in preparation for AI.
Oh yes, the infrastructure that it takes for AI, right? Absolutely, kind of the magic behind the machine there. All right, and third, if every student can master one AI-related skill right now, what would you recommend that be?
Learning how to work with agents.
Okay.
Yep.
And I would say adaptability, the ability to move quickly,
yes.
Pivot.
Absolutely, it's moving so rapidly right now. I mean, just, unheard of. All right, let's dive in here a little bit. So really insightful, kind of quick takes there coming out of the gate. Now let's kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. How is AI fundamentally changing the landscape of learning, research, daily operations across campus, kind of campus life? I mean, it's across all bounds of campus for sure. So, Kristina, I'll start with you. You've led major universities, and you now work closely with other technology innovators in your role at Catalyzer Ventures. From that broader perspective, where do you see AI having the biggest transformation on higher education?
Well, I think, as you said, we take a big picture step back. What is the mission of the university?
Sure.
And Jose Ortega y Gasset wrote about it in the 30s, and it works today just as well, which is we are responsible for passing on culture to the next generation. We train the researchers. We prepare professionals for government and non-government positions, and we get ready students to be successful and productive in society. So that's what we do. So then what does AI do well? Well, it writes well.
Sure.
Pretty well. I'm an engineer, so I think it writes great. It also can plan, decide, and implement with agents certain tasks. So that's what it does well. What it doesn't do well right now, or I should say yet, is execute complicated tasks. It needs to be guided. And it needs to be guided because the influence of AI affects people. So if people aren't guiding it, then the kind of solutions that it puts in place aren't going to speak, in my view, to the safety and the ethics and the influence on people. So I think what it does well right now and what it will do well in the future, that's going to evolve and change. So I think where we're going to see it is in learning. We have to teach, again, the fundamentals, and we have to go deep. So if we think about what AI can do and what humans have to do, then I think the next step is to see how is that going to affect the universities heterogeneously. So different departments, different schools are going to use it in different ways. So that's, I think, really something important to recognize. And then I think in terms of learning, one of the most stunning things, I think, that came out of a recent study by Central China Normal University was that they showed, taking a six-hat learning technology approach or structure, that stronger students will accelerate, which is why accelerate came to mind, their cognitive abilities.
Yep.
Weaker students will stagnate. So we think about technology as closing a gap between the haves and the have-nots technology. It's actually going to widen it.
Sure.
So what we need to do is teach students what they need to know, not necessarily what we have always taught, and that is to go to the fundamentals, think deeply, understand that, as you said, they're going to have to adapt, they're going to have to pivot, they're going to have to be more entrepreneurial about defining their path.
Sure.
That isn't something that we have necessarily done well, I think, and that we need to continue to do. So that's in the learning area. I think in the research area, again, we need to teach our students and our faculty to use this as a tool that would be guided. So help brainstorm, generate ideas, synthesize ideas, but at the end of the day, because you're applying those solutions to the human, humans have to be in the loop. So that's really important. And then the last is in terms of infrastructure. What do leaders do at universities? They create shared vision. They get the resources to carry out that vision. At the end of the day, they keep their eye on the outcomes and the impact. Use it to remove friction so that the students and the faculty can do better and do their work better. So I think those are the three things that I'm hoping we're going to see in the future.
With the AI gap, just had a double click on that, right? For a while, we spoke about the gap with broadband access and how that could widen that gap between the have and have-nots. Right. Do you see this as larger than that gap or similar? How do you kind of rank that and compare that?
You know, I think that's a good question. I think it's bigger because I think we are closing the broadband gap. But it's really the difference between engaging with AI tools in a passive way or in an active way.
Sure.
One that thinks about curiosity. You know, I have a quick little example. I used to do work in AI applied to pattern recognition for medical diagnostics. So we looked at cervical smears, try and see if we could detect cervical cancer. Because we were taking it from an engineering approach, we were solving the wrong problem. So it wasn't until we brought in experts from other disciplines and we went deep with their knowledge that we actually figured out the right problem to solve. I thought the problem was to find every cancerous cell on the slide. They said, no, we just have to find half of them. But it's important not to find the ones, mislabel ones that aren't cancerous as cancerous, because then you have just filled up your field of view with things that aren't cancerous, so the diagnostics from the physician will be not cancerous when in fact it is cancerous.
Sure.
So that was a real eye-opener, and so that's why I really stress humans need to go deep and understand the fundamentals, no matter what field it is, and then guide these tools to get better solutions.
Sure. Jose, so Dakota State, widely known for its leadership in cybersecurity and technology, as AI becomes a foundational capability across all of these industries, how are you seeing it reshape how students learn and how research is conducted on campus?
Well, Kristina's already sort of answered that question. I'll add a couple of things. One is, as a technology, we call ourselves a technology-forward institution. We've always said we're not educating our students for the jobs of today or even tomorrow, but we're preparing them to go out and be ready for whatever comes. So I do think it comes back to, it's not just teaching students about facts and knowledge and et cetera. They have to develop their own cognitive abilities to be able to think through and develop a process of thinking that evolves over time to solve problems. So we talk a lot about having our students solve real-world problems. We don't tell them what the problem is. First thing they've got to do is figure out in teams what the problem is, pull it apart, explore some solutions, and then see if it works together. And I tell them that when they come for their first visit to the university. We're not going to give you the answers, but when you leave here, you'll be able to develop the answers yourself and with others. So it's a slightly different process. In the teaching learning environment, I think there have been some hiccups over the last several years in many institutions, and a lot of discussion about plagiarism and academic integrity. I think, you know, we expect our graduates to go out and work with these tools. What we have to do is figure out a way to encourage them to learn, but then also to assess their learning, not by an answer the way math does. I mean, you have to show the process by which you got to the answer in math. You can't just say the answer's A or 3. You have to say how you get there. And I think we'll see a shift in assessment, which hopefully faculty will accept, that they have to do that in order to understand that the students have been able to work with AI tools in an effective way. And so, you know, oral exams, debates, journaling, things of that kind, rather than simply the one final exam. So hopefully that will change on the teaching learning side. On the research side, I think there's tremendous opportunity. The key in research, I've always thought, is how do you develop the next question, right? Do your research, but what is the next question? And framing the next question can certainly be aided by AI tools.
Yep.
But we also have one very pragmatic use of AI in the research side of things, which is to ensure that our research proposals are in compliance with all the various rules and protocols that we have in place, your institutional review boards, the state requirements, the federal requirements, etc. And so now it's very easy. We can run our proposals through a filter with AI, just checking on all of those compliance issues, and that works really well for our researchers. It saves a lot of time.
From an efficiency perspective,
Exactly.
for sure.
Yeah.
And even I think the thought about even just from a learning perspective is how do you document how you used AI,
Right.
And
Yes.
how does that evolve, right?
Exactly.
Like we've gone our encyclopedias or different articles online, but actually how do you leverage those to get to the next answers?
We started that when when LLMs became suddenly burst on the scene, even though they'd been around for a while, and we've been teaching them for a while in computer science. We encouraged everybody to explore, experiment, try it out. But I asked for people to be transparent about it and acknowledge the fact that they had used AI. I don't know that everybody did it, but I do know that we had a couple of faculty members when they wrote a paper, they actually put the acknowledgement in. This was produced with the aid of AI, and that transparency, I think, allows people not to hide the fact. So it's sort of not subterfuge that people are using different AI products, but it's out in the open, and then they can talk about how it worked, how it didn't work, what it did well, what it might not have done well. Other people can comment, and so it becomes much more open and therefore much more usual. And hopefully that trend will continue. Although I understand, the shocking thing to me about AI in research was a number of purely AI-generated papers. And the example that shocked me was the headline that Wiley, which is a very respectful scientific publisher, had withdrawn 7,000 papers in a year as having been AI-generated completely.
Wow.
So that was shocking to me.
7,000?
7,000 worldwide.
Out of how many?
Sorry,
Don't
remember exactly, but
yeah.
it
But
was
I think
shocking.
that's a really important point. I ran into this. As you mentioned, I'm managing a fund right now, and one of our portfolio companies was getting ready to deliver options. I said, great. I said, so how are you going to determine the Black-Scholes value of those? And they said, oh, well, we're just going to put it into ChatGPT. And I said, okay, that'll be interesting. So they did. They put it into ChatGPT. They got back the answer. And I went to the CTO of the company and I said, what do you think about this? And he goes, well, I don't know anything about AI, but I know a lot about partial differential equations, and that is wrong. So that comes back to understanding the fundamentals.
Right.
You've got to understand the fundamentals, and that's what we in higher ed, and all the way down the whole K through 20 continuum, you have to teach the fundamentals, and you have to teach, in my view, not just the value, but the joy of creating.
Sure.
And that's where I think, I loved what you said about adaptive, because our students, they're going to need to adapt. I was talking to another student, he graduated, now he's working in another portfolio company. He made his career as a software optimization architect. That's what he did, he optimized software. He then started working with the large language models, applying it towards energy optimization, and realized that they could do it better than he did. And he's like, what I spent my whole career doing has just been disintermediated. So after he went out, had a coffee, and came back, he embraced the agents.
Yes.
Yep.
And he pivoted. And that's what we've got to teach and reward, and figure out how to reward that adaptability, that ability to pivot, and to be very entrepreneurial. I mean, it's almost, I don't know about you, but when I went to college, there wasn't a great career center. That was not a big thing. And the student services, which we spent a lot of time, justifiably so, because we're all about promoting our students like you and your vision for the next generation in those careers. Well, we had to do a lot of that on our own.
Yeah.
I think students are going to have to be more entrepreneurial and to figure out how they create their role and their, I think we're going to see a lot more startups. I think we're going to see a lot more innovation in that regard.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we have to give them the tools to be successful there.
Yep. Because if we keep asking the same question, you keep getting the same answer, right? And so, how do you leverage that creativity?
But don't you think it's sort of ironic that there's this concern that AI isn't perfect? well, humans aren't perfect either. We're
Sure.
not infallible. And so we need to have a little bit of give and take both ways. But it is interesting that we see things this way. I mean, as somebody said, artificial intelligence versus human stupidity.
Yep.
I mean, how are we going to acknowledge the fact that neither is perfect and that we have to sort of negotiate the circumstances and situation? And you're right, it's the fundamentals, the way you can think about things, the way you process, the way you analyze, the way you can develop conclusions is then becomes perhaps more of a collaborative process.
That's right. And I think collaboration is what you were saying. I mean, the example that I was sharing about the pattern recognition of cancerous cells and cervical smears, we would not have known the problem we should have solved if we hadn't brought a pathologist onto the team who had that deep knowledge in pathology, who can then say, okay, when you get the output from your system, it's going to be viewed by a physician, and they're going to show the top 100 suspicious cells. So if you've got 100,000 cells and you've got a 1% false positive rate, it's going to inundate those visions with things that the machine thought were cancerous, but they're not, and that person, a woman, is going to get a clear diagnosis when possibly they should have been treated.
Sure.
So I think that there's a couple things that I think, going back to, again, my career, I started out getting a PhD in a multiple disciplinary program. We had an engineer, a scientist, a medical physician, and someone who worked at actually Varian. So we had industry, university, and academic pursuits across several departments. It was a nice to. Today it's necessary. So I think that we're going to see those sort of collaborations get tighter, and they're going to be necessary in order to utilize AI in order to solve these problems that are important to society.
Yeah, that's an important skill I think that we have to introduce our students to, which is interdisciplinary activities, so that they are not just comfortable in their own sort of, I shouldn't say narrow, but in their own disciplinary area, but it can in fact work with others and interact with others to come up with ideas and solutions.
Sure, much more interdisciplinary across both with the education and then the requirements that the institutions have. Let's shift a little bit. Jose, you already mentioned this, the infrastructure, right? You mentioned the required, right? How important that's going to be for AI, right? So this innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. So what kind of infrastructure and cultural shifts are we seeing across institutions? And specifically at Dakota State, how have you invested, right? How have you built that AI, or building, I should say, that AI-ready data center? Just talk a little bit about that journey that Dakota State's been on.
Okay, well, as I said, we had been in AI sat within computer science at DSU. Then 3 years ago, we broke it out and said, explore, try things out. We made some investment in some of the applications, not across the board. We never had an enterprise solution, but we tried to have people use what they needed in the different disciplines. We said AI has to go across all disciplines, and we had one piece of infrastructure that was very helpful to us. We had 2 introductory courses that in the old days used to be coding, and now we made them
the old days, like 5 years ago.
New and emerging technologies.
Right.
And so AI was incorporated across the entire institution, including ethics and responsible use. So that was very, very helpful. We also encouraged our staff to use AI for various products. So HR, I think, was one that jumped in quickly. Marketing jumped in quickly. And so we've had this period of experimentation. And that was and then we broke out several degree programs. So we have 2 undergraduate degrees, one very technical, one more applied, 2 master's degrees, same thing, one technical, one applied, and our PhD is about to be launched. Okay. So we were very quick into the AI environment because of the kind of institution we are. We are the sort of technology, computing and information technology institute for the system. Then we got to the point I said, okay, everybody's doing their thing. We don't have anything strategic, but we don't have infinite funds. So how can we be more strategic in how we use our resources to benefit the whole institution? So I did put out the challenge earlier this academic year that I thought that we should aim to be an AI leading institution, and they had to sort of have a conversation about what that all meant. Sure. We did have a very, very good faculty advisory group that met to talk about AI that first year and develop a position statement on AI, and they incorporated some students and some staff members into that process. So we had a statement that we encouraged AI use. We then, at the same time, recognized that you can't really be effective in using AI in your own organization without really having your data in good shape. Data are the key. That's what feeds the AI engines. And so we started to pay attention to our administrative systems and our academic systems and where the data were. And we know our data are a mess, quite frankly. So then we decided, well, we should at least modernize our data center and consolidate them. So that is in process. And that's working very, very well at the moment. In fact, our system is now doing some of that.
Great.
So having that in place, we're now looking at how do we make investments to think not just about what's happening in the teaching, learning, and research environment, but given that we're saying AI is going to change the nature of various industries and various organizations, how is it going to change academia? How is it going to change the academy? How are we going to think about the academy going forward? And so we're in that process right now. We're trying to rethink that. Quite frankly, I think there's some very exciting things we can do, and we might see some quite significant change by investing in the administrative infrastructure of the university, and the way we operate will become certainly AI enhanced, AI augmented. But to do that, we've got to have our data in a reasonable place. So we're looking at, in effect, what I'd love to see is that we create a digital twin of the whole university. The data go into a data lake and manage there. And quite honestly, I talk about transformation, but really, I think there could be a future where a lot of our existing systems, our legacy systems, as you like, we can sort of move beyond them, because the thinking about how we use data, how data can be so actively used now in decision-making of all kinds and can generate new ideas and new responses, I think we might be actually giving up some of those systems upon which we have relied for years and years. Now, the mindset has to change. So that's the other aspect of infrastructure. So we've got a technology infrastructure, a data infrastructure. There's a human infrastructure that has to work with it, or it's never going to happen. It can't be pushed just from the top. We have to have buy-in, and we have to look at how we allocate resources. So we're trying to get people to get excited about opportunities for doing things differently.
Sure.
In a way that we can grow without having to grow the people resources of the institution, and we allow people to do the more interesting kinds of things that they would enjoy doing more than the routine activities. So we're almost at the point of perhaps looking at, not quite, but sort of like a job audit. What are those functions in every part of the university that could be done much more effectively and more quickly using AI? And then how would we put that in place? But rather than do it one agent at a time, I want to look at the university more holistically, so that we don't invest in certain things that ultimately have to be changed. I know things have to be changed anyway, but sort of this holistic approach, that we look at the whole university and try and find solutions that will prompt us going forward as an AI institution.
As you're looking at that, cultural evolution, right? And you said that, I think you're correct, that human component is much harder than the actual technical components to this. Where do you find the most resistance, right? Is it just kind of, day-to-day kind of, creature of habit kind of, human things, or where do you find the most resistance that you've really had to focus most of your efforts on, would you say?
I would say probably I would call them with the data holders, the people who see their job as protecting the data, and that's what they look for.
When you said job audit, I was like, oh, that's probably an interesting conversation across across campus.
They're doing their job and they're doing it. But in fact, there are areas where, because of that, there are bottlenecks in the process. And we all know what they are.
Sure.
Particularly in enrollment, looking at transfers. We do a lot of articulation agreements. Those take a lot of time. I don't think AI can whip those out pretty quickly. So I think just getting people used to it. So people are now saying, we want to be an AI leading institution, and they're all thinking about what does that mean. And so as we come into our budget timing, the issue is, where are we going to go? Where are we going to invest? We want to ensure that student success is number one. That's what we're there for. So we don't want to sort of erode our ability for our students to be successful and our faculty to be successful just because for the sake of an administrative process.
Yeah.
But it's a balancing act, and it's hard for institutions. And I'll bring up another issue that we talk a lot about the digital divide, and is it widening or there's the gaps? You know, we've been talking about the digital divide ever since I've been in technology, I think. But in addition to the digital divide for students who have access to certain tools, students who may not have access to the same tools, that's one whole area. I think there's going to be a digital divide at the institutional level. So we look at the institutions that have the resources to invest big. And I'll throw out one, Arizona State, right? I love Michael. I've worked with him. They do great things. They do grand things. But there are layers. How many universities in the United 4,000 or so in the United States. There are layers of institutions that for them a change of 50 students in enrollment would bring them down.
Yeah.
How are they going to invest in AI? Because AI is going to be so pervasive in society that to do anything, you've got to learn how to work with it. So I do worry that we will see institutions that move forward and then institutions that just are left behind because the resources simply aren't there.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think that what you'll see is when I was meeting with faculty at Ohio State, I had one faculty who's brilliant. I love Dr. Sue. He came to me and he goes, we need to get 10,000 GPUs. They cost at the time about $10,000 with $100 million because we have to ensure that there's access. Yep. And I remember thinking, okay, yeah, access can be important. I'd like to maybe take that question from a student perspective as well. So I think that one of the things in terms of infrastructure that we could do, and I think most universities could do this, I think it's actually will be interesting to do, is you've got, like take Ohio State, 65,000 students coming in, and you've got 600,000 alumni. That is a large neural network system. Mm-hmm. You have 500 different majors and tens of thousands of classes. How do you expect any student coming in with a particular interest and passion to find a path? But I think that cognitive mapping is quite easy to do. So you have to have an assessment, and going back to the six hat thinking, you assess the students coming in, and now you've got 600,000. This context window is huge, that you can map their path through an Ohio State or through any university system to where they want to be in 5 years and in 10 years. By the way, those alumni should be part of the network because they're on a continuum too. So then you can have agents pointing to them saying, you want to be this manager, this person, this, maybe this vice president or an SVP or area, you need to have these skill sets or your gaps. So you're having a gap analysis that then this platform provides the students and is their assist to get through the system and then continue on. I think that's one thing that we should be doing from the student perspective to help them, again, identify, be adaptive, find their path, because it's not going to be obvious what is going to be available. Like, the student, now an employee in one of the portfolio companies, who just found the thing that he was really good at, just got disintermediated. Sure. But because he figured out somewhere along the way to be resilient and to pivot, we've got to figure out how to reveal that with our students, it seems to me. So, and then you're seeing, I think, more universities think about having their own small data centers. Duke University, I was just talking to the provost, and they're actually looking at creating that kind of infrastructure platform for students and access. Again, it comes back to access. So I think you'll see how can universities compete. I think finding the place where they're best and focusing on excellence. If that was one message I would give back to everybody, is you're going to have to really think about what you do well, what you can be excellent at, and really drive a bus through that. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I think there's a lot of concern that AI may replace critical thinking, but really it's almost like you need to apply even more critical thinking to AI tools in order to be successful.
That's exactly right.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
So I think it's like it's evolving and very, a very interesting discussion. So let's kind of move through a little bit here. I know we really want to talk about the future, right? Yep. And if there's things that a student and as a university could prepare for the future. Yep. So, look 5 to 10 years ahead, right? What would an AI-enabled university look like if you had a crystal ball, right? What does the one that has succeeded look like? Kristina, I'll start with you.
I think one thing is that every student coming in would have access to maybe a few career paths. And it would be by taking into account all those that came before them through this particular system. So this cognitive map I've described, I think that should be just available to all the particular students. It really is building on something called Brace's paradox, which is, if you look at a toll booth, and when new toll booths open up, it gets more congested rather than less right away.
Sure.
Because everybody tries to whoosh, go over there. And so that's a known thing from the 1850s about how energy flows through a system. So I think using AI tools to build that sort of ability to predict the future. I think that would be one thing. I think the second thing is, I think within 10 years we'll see quantum as part of this equation. And then I'm hoping that in 10 years we will use all these tools to attack problems that are uniquely human. Mental health, safety, the environment, and I think there's a lot to be done there. And lastly, we need to get pay more attention, it seems to me, to the social sciences, the humanities, because figuring out how, should we have, like they have in Alaska, they have Alaska Permanent Fund, where every person gets a dividend from the natural resources. So people are advocating now for, some sort of universal income. You could actually, going back to your digital twin, everybody could have their own AI license, and if a company wants to deploy a technology that disintermediates that individual's, ability to work, then they license their twin, and they get paid. It's different than I would say just giving away money. It's actually it's a transaction, and it's an important transaction because it's something you own. All of us are contributing to AI, right? We're all training the weights. Sure. We used to call them weights in the parameters in these large language models. Why aren't we? Why isn't there a way we think about how society as a whole can benefit? And I think that's the ethics part of it too. And we really need the deep thinkers in the humanities and social sciences to help us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And again, the kind of debunking a myth there, right? I think there's a lot of concern that AI will make the world a very technical kind of space, but it's actually bringing the humanities together. And how do you kind of leverage those to really create the? What do you?
I tend to agree with you completely. I think quantum will be here by then. That will accelerate things in interesting ways. I had the idea that we're going to see what I would call a deep renaissance in humanism. I spent my whole career in technology, different technologies, working with how organizations, be they federal governments, corporations, and universities can teach it, can prepare people for a technology-enabled world with whichever technology. But the more I do that now, the more I see there's sort of little cracks in between that we have to take care of, the human side of things. And there's, in a way, I see a rise for some of those liberal arts institutions that have done so well in keeping the liberal arts and the social sciences alive. I think they have a bright future in this world, and that we shouldn't just focus on the technologies, because if we have, otherwise we've sort of industrialized education and we've industrialized jobs, and work becomes more boxed in, whereas the humanities and allowing people to enjoy, you talked about the joy in creation. I talk about the joy in discovery when I talk about research.
Absolutely.
You can learn something nobody else knows until you tell them about it, right? This is fascinating to me. The joy of even reading a book was always turning the page.
Sure.
Is it that physical? Turns the page, what comes next? Because you don't know what comes next until you've turned the page. So finding the joy in all of this, rather than the sort of hardcore technical aspects, which we deal with on a daily basis, everyone. But I think that's part of this future, and that we have to allow that to happen. And we have to encourage the sort of two kinds of futures moving forward, so they merge together, so that life is more fulfilling. And maybe more fulfilling for the agents too, if we let the agents have some joy in the process,
No, for sure. I mean, I think that there's so much we still don't know about the brain, right? So I was talking to a neurosurgeon at Duke, and he was saying, and he reminded me of something I think we all know as people and educators, that there are certain windows of time in your life and the plasticity of the brain where you're open to learning, like languages. And when you're not so open, I'd love to learn a language now. I'm sure it's going to be very difficult compared to when I was a kid, or when you just naturally learn it up until what age, and then that window kind of starts to close, right? And he said, well, there's peptides that are interacting with the synapses, and they're either preventing or closing the ability to learn. I said, well, can't we learn how to open those windows? And he says, well, actually, that's research that's going on right now. So when people think about, you have, 100 billion neurons, and each neuron's connected to roughly, 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We, right now, with our large language models, they're still pretty sparsely interconnected. But that doesn't take into account all the richness of the biology and the chemistry that's going on. And that's where I'm hoping that we'll get to a place where we'll understand better mental health. And we see that as a challenge with our students and faculty, and we saw that a lot through COVID. And so recognizing that, we need to pay attention, in my opinion, also to the ways that we can use these tools for the betterment of society. And to me, it's a privilege to be at a university, to be able to do research, to be able to teach and have our students involved. And that was the reason I went into administration, is I wanted to make it better for the students and the faculty. So AI tools, taking out the friction of what they can do, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be the creativity, the adaptability, the identifying, as you said, the questions to ask, and then applying all kinds of tools to get the solution.
Absolutely. And what an amazing opportunity if we could expand the time that people had to learn over the course of their lifetime. I mean, that would just be,
Well, that's another skill. People have to understand and learn how to learn.
Sure.
And that's part of what we do in the university environment, is teach them how to learn, how to learn in these new ways. So I think that's open to all of us.
Absolutely. All right, one final rapid fire question here to wrap up with. If you could give every university in the world one AI capability tomorrow, what would it be? What do you think is the most important today to launch them on this journey?
I think access to the technology that they can experiment with, utilize, and apply.
Yeah, I would tend to say the same thing. I mean, it gives them that experience to play with things. It's a good way to learn.
Sure.
And when everybody's doing it, playing with it, then you can share experiences as well.
Sure.
So that the learning becomes more than individual learning, it becomes sort of more of a collective learning as well, just by default, because everybody's experimenting. And how children do it. Why are children much more technology adept than their parents? Because they're telling each other how to do it.
Sure.
Have you ever met a child in our day and age who's ever read a manual? Some of us used to read manuals.
I can't believe they still even ship those with things now. It's like, who's reading those?
My daughter sometimes will grab my phone and say, you do it this way. I say, what do you mean you do it that way? I mean, I've never done it that way. My thumbs don't move that way.
Sure.
Very different.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think the last thing on that is what you said it quite rightly, Jose, that everybody needs to work with them. And I think that's one of the hardest things is it's how do we have administrators as well as faculty as well as students all working because at the end of the day, the administrators, whether at the school, department, or university level, they're setting the vision, the collective vision, getting the resources to carry that out, et cetera, assessing. If they don't know how digital tools work, then they're a little bit, at a disadvantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, just a fantastic conversation today. This discussion really highlights something important. Becoming an AI-ready university isn't about just adopting new technology. It's about rethinking infrastructure we discussed today, collaboration, the education models, right? The skills the students need for the future. From Dakota State University's leadership in technology education to Dr. Johnson's decades of experience in advancing research and innovation across institutions, it's clear that higher education is an exciting new chapter. I want to thank both of you for being here today, and for thank everyone for watching Tech Unscripted, and we'll see you on the next episode as we explore how the future of technology is evolving. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you, guys.